hold on to your knickers for this one. This beloved underground band is back, baby. Metalheads, welcome to Graphic Metal, where metal is celebrated with design in mind. This is extreme metal albums you need to hear that were released during the month of February 2024. FYI, we'll be presenting these based on when they were released. So with that, let's get to it. Swords of Dajjal by Necrowretch, a blackened death metal album released on February 2nd. Bring out your swords, we're headed for war. Here we have your standard prototypical hybrid between black and death metal fused together. If you have never heard of this style before, you're probably going to wet your pants in pleasure. But for avid listeners, I don't know if you necessarily need this specific one. By no means is it bad. It's another really solid effort for this fairly popular underground band on disc 5 coming via Valence, France. I particularly want to call attention to some really slick background effects that add another layer of atmosphere to some of the songs. Nemedian Knowledge is a great example of this, and the drumming is sensational. From time to time, almost having like a Dave Lombardo kind of from Slayer style to it. But otherwise, outside of that, there's nothing really particular that stands out. They do have a solid band and album name. The album cover is also respectable. Not entirely sure why they stopped using their actual band logo on the actual covers. By keeping the band and album names the exact same font and only relying on the color change was not a wise decision. Also, I'm not convinced by the faded yellow with a hint of green background gradient color. I don't think it allows for either the figure or the background to capture your interest effectively. In general, I wish that the figure's face and or neck garment was just a little bit more detailed and pronounced. But nitpicks aside, I do love the silhouette, simplicity of the figure and the posture and position of the knife in which is being held. Ultimately, do I recommend this album? Sort of. I definitely do think you should listen to it if you are not familiar with, again, this style of Black and Death crossover, or if you are a fan of Behemoth, or also just in general Dave Lombardo's style of drumming, because those are really the strengths of it. Otherwise, I don't think that there's a high enough consistent level of quality, but it's still pretty solid. Graphic Metal rating is a 82. The Aphothic Embrace by Zwielicht. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that Zwielicht. It's a black metal album released on February 9th. It's a little rough around the edges. Not every moment works, and the vocals can get a little cringy at times, but overall, this is a pretty solid black metal album that leans a little on the thrash side as far as the delivery. Just their sophomore release coming via Zwielicht, Germany. Much like the music, the album design is also, it's close. Love the coloration and abstract nature. Also really love to look closely and see the finer details. Typography, on the other hand, is not legible enough. They also opted to change their band logo on each album, which is, in this case, they changed it to just like the font typography, which I think was a poor decision, which is even more of a bummer because they actually have a really great logo. But this one just has no personality. They also have a really great band name. It actually ultimately translates to Twilight. If they just had like the border was just white, that alone would have improved the design significantly. But ultimately, do I recommend this album? I think so. Again, nothing really that stands out per se, but it is solid enough to keep you entertained throughout. I also think that it smartly knows when to balance the overall pace. GrafikMetal rating, I'm going to give this one a 81. Echoes of Light by Chapel of Disease, a goth melodic death heavy metal album released on February 9th. This album wants us to take us on a journey into chasing light, only to ultimately destroy it. And this journey to light, it transcends music, space, and time in many ways, creating its own new type of light in the process. This is GrafikMetal's album of the month of February across all subgenres of music. From Cologne, Germany, this three-piece is on full-length album number 4. I mentioned it at the beginning. Your guess is as good as mine as to where to classify it. But to help you out, I'm going to list out the influences that I can hear when listening to it. Death, doom, goth, prog, atmospheric, melodic death, heavy metal, thrash, classic or traditional rock, blues, and even punk. This album may be an eclectic mix, but it absolutely slays. If you think Horrendous is good, wait till you hear these guys. 2 for 2, back to back, leaving me utterly speechless. Tribulation, Chemist, Kingston Wall, Wishbone Ash, and Horrendous are some of the other bands that come to mind. But most importantly, it is that, their greatest strength, they are gods of melody, rhythm, and solos, which I heart, and I think you would too. After all, it's at the heart of rock and metal. With the design, with each of the last 2 albums, they have opted to, change directions, which was fitting and smartly done given the change in the music. This one won't win any awards, but it perfectly is executed and represents the album really well. Rebecca Week captures this abstract, visual representation of this magical journey into light really, really well. And in using the atmospheric nature of spatial sky is a perfect way to do so. I always say, when in doubt, keep it simple. And this one is a great example of that. I also love the mask choice and therefore the white border around it, which really elevates the cover art. It also made it easier to add the album title, which I love the placement of, and the font choice. I also think that, as a result, it also just kind of makes the visual feel and appear a little bit larger than life because of that spatial awareness it has. They do, however, I'm calling them out now, they need to change their band name because of the evolution that they've now taken the band. It no longer fits, in my opinion. Ultimately, though, you all want to know, do I recommend this album? If you can get past the fact that they no longer are death. Yes, you tricky long-time death metal fans out there, I'm calling you out. Are you willing and able to expand your mind? If you can, then you will fall in love with this album like I have. It has been on non-stop repeat. I cannot put it down. It takes me on a dream, and it feels like a dream to me. It's the album that I've always seeked out, right? Look, I enjoy death metal from time to time, just like the next. But do we really need another one? There are plenty of them. However, what I really think is admirable and something that we should all seek for is something that challenges us. It reimagines what we think metal can be. Aspire for innovation. I say let's chase the light where metal belongs. GrafikMetal rating, I'm going to give this one a 94. Time by Infected Rain, a Djent new alt prog metal album released on February 9th. Ilana Katangra, or stage name Ilana Scissorhands, is a really talented singer. She's also been keeping quite busy as of late, making several different appearances. She's also quite beautiful, which definitely naturally draws a little bit more attention. But I still don't think that her craft is being used like effectively enough. With this specific one, they've been leaning even more into their influences of Meshuggah, Fear Factory, and Otep. Speaking of Otep, those two women sound like sisters. Closing your eyes, you would never know the difference between them, especially considering their vocal techniques. What's so really cool about the band is that Infected Rain, they come via Chisuzu Moldova, which is awesome, right? Forming in 2008, and this is actually their sixth album now at this point. I'm okay with their band name, Infected Rain, but design is not their strength in any capacity. No band logo even. Like they just basically opt to change out using a different font for each of the different bands, and even that's not very effective. The album also is conceptually there. I think it's an interesting way to represent time ultimately, two different timelines, or a black hole or void or time travel, something of the abstract nature, but it's just also not well executed. The biggest change that needed to happen to make it more effective is that the background is the biggest issue. So essentially what needed to happen is that like our eyes need to be able to interpret quickly the relationship between the foreground or present time with the quote unquote future or leaning towards other timeline, something of the sort, the machine, right? Those two objects needed to be crystal clear and build that connection relationship to be able to relate to it. But unfortunately, like the sky and the rest of the background is so muddy and not well, like it's fading and blending in too much with the both of the other figures, that it doesn't allow for either the past or current and future or past, whatever, to distinguish each other or have a relationship to, which is a bummer because, again, conceptually is there, it's just not well executed. I do, however, want to point out that I think that they're pretty good at like just storytelling in general, and then also pretty good at song titles. I think that there's a lot of interesting titles. I think one in particular, the last song is titled, I think it's A Second or a Thousand Years. Yeah, A Second or a Thousand Years. That's really beautiful and thought-provoking. It's really clever. I really like it. Do I recommend this album? No, I can't recommend it. Sorry. It has its moments of like sick modern Djent riffs and like thunderous bass. And from time to time, Alana does show what she's capable of, but it's far and few in between. A song, though worthy to listen to, I think, is Game of Blame. That's a really freaking good song. It has everything. It even has some of the like they add some of the cheesy like 80s Van Halen like inspired drums. It was really well done too. I really like that song a lot. And come to think about it, the last three tracks in general are the strength of the album. Between the slower pace second to last song, and then the last one is just instrumental kind of cleanse the palate, so to speak. But those three songs are definitely the strongest. With that said, graphic metal rating, I'm going to give this one a 71. A Giant Bound to Fall by Eternal Storm, a melodic death metal album released on February 16th. If you woke up being swept up from onto the beach via like an ocean wave, this might be the music that was in your head playing at that time. If only those freaking vocals were better. Actually, before I go any further, does anybody actually know if this band disbanded in the past and reemerged? I ask because it's bugging me how much it makes me think of another band from the early 2000s that I just for life of me can't think of. But all points lead to this being a newer band on their second disc, so I digress for now. Regardless, originally from Madrid, Spain, but now they're actually spread out amongst Scotland and in the UK. It is their sophomore release, and like I said, the band they're so close to being special. Conceptually right there with the best in the like emotional driven melodic death metal scene. The vocals just simply hold it back, and it would be nice if they added a little more like just catchy choruses given the style of music. They also need to work on their designs. Not saying it's bad. The album artwork on this one, it's okay. I think that it just ultimately needs to be better executed. The band name, I like I mentioned, it's also bugging me that it's making me think of another band. But that aside, it is a strong name. I do think that my one nitpick with the band logo, which is okay, but they need to fix the elongated tail on the M, because if they don't, they're going to run into all sorts of problems on how to use it. So, do I recommend this album? Heck yeah, I do. This is basically Explosion in the Sky meets Insomnia. It's at its finest. I mean, it's really strong outside of the vocals. Just again, remember, do not expect strong vocals. But when you listen to this specific style of music, I feel like most of you out there, you're gonna be okay with it. This I'm gonna call this one, actually, just because of it's coming to my mind. It's the band Really Likes Clouds album of 2024, and graphic metal rating, I'm gonna give this one an 88. Moon Healer by Job for a Cowboy. It's a death metal album released on February 23. All right, hold on to your knickers for this one. This beloved underground band is back, baby. Back after 10 years since Sun Eater. It's their fifth album coming via Arizona. Many of you are boldly calling out this album as either the best or comeback album of the month, and even some of you are even going so far as to to place it within the camp of like horrendous level, which is absolutely insane to me. So what do I think personally? I'm not impressed. Worth noting that I've never really been a fan of JFAC. It's I just they haven't really been a differentiator for me. I think that's my biggest issue is that they're just. I mean, minus the bass. The bass stands out. I do like. I've always liked their bass, but on this album, for example, the production to me is just too muddy. That's been always my issue with some death metal albums is just the muddy production. I also cannot relate to the vocals. It's just this is an example of like that distorted noise, basically. And I understand it's death metal and we're supposed to be used to that and all that, but there's degrees and there's lines you just can't cross. And to me, I've just never been a fan of Davy's vocal style. The riffs and song structures also are just kind of boring. There's nothing like it's not horrendous. It's just it's not even remotely close. Like to me, sorry, I'm just being honest. Despite all this, I don't mind the album cover though. At least it's a little chaotic, but I think it works really well. It's really fun to investigate and to analyze and to ponder. If I had to guess, I'm assuming that it's actually a melting pot of ideas that represent visual artifacts to depict each of the different songs on the albums. That's what I've been able to gather, which is super cool. I love that. What's not cool though is the band name or logo. I've always hated it. I've never been a fan. So do I recommend this album? Personally, no. I really dislike it, but many of you do out there. So I do think it's worth checking out and see if anything stands out. But look at it this way. I mean, even if you hate it, like myself, at least you got a cool, nice album cover that can be used as a cool decoration or as a paperweight. So, graphic metal rating, I'm gonna give this one a 59. Fall by Borknagar. It's a prog / viking metal album released on February 23. They formed back in 1994, so this is a well-established band coming via Bergen, Norway. 12 albums in, and for those who are familiar, their greatest asset is their consistency and reliability. One could argue that they've never really released a bad album, which is pretty impressive considering the fact that they're now entering 30 years in their career. That is not an easy feat, and they should be commended for that. The question is how did they do it this time? Did they continue doing what they've been doing, or did they, fall? I don't think they did either, quite frankly. If I clear my headspace and approach this album and reviewing it stripped completely away from their past, I think that it's really good. But if I approach it with the band's past, then I think it's a little bit of a letdown, especially when considering how otherworldly the last two in Winter Thrice and True North were. But whichever direction I go, I do think that I've come to the conclusion that I end up in the same place with the same conclusion, which is that it's a very good album, but it's not a great album. Very little on the disc stands out in one way or the other. It's pretty much a even Steven kind of album. Even the album cover is that way. The painting is really nice, and I think it captures the vibe really well. They've always had a thing for connecting with nature, but the fact that they just like lazily just threw on and slapped on the band logo and the album name, it just without any thought on like the contrast relationship to it, it just felt like it was lazy, and you can't even, it's like the relationship between the typography then and the image is not very good, and so it's just kind of a but nonetheless, I'm going to, with all this in mind, I'm gonna stick with GrafikMetal rating of 85. The Savage Sword by Nemedian Chronicles. It's a power traditional epic metal album released on February 29th. Debut release for this band coming via Toulouse, France. Don't think that I have ever heard a band or an album sound this close to Blind Guardian. Even more impressive is to have possibly outdone them in the grand scale and it be their debut. Respect for the ambition and desire to come out of the gates storming the fields with swords held up high, with an epic story and thematic feeling to capture our hearts right away. The question is, does it work? Well, yes, in theory. As we know, thanks to Blind Guardian, which is the band they most are, sound like, especially vocally. But at the end of the day, it's I have to go with it's close, but it's notes, melodies, riffs, choruses, it's just not quite there. The production really holds it back. It's weak. So it's kind of hard to determine because it doesn't really allow the songs to really thrive. Kudos, though, for the idea of making the bookends the ballads, which is an interesting concept. You don't really see that too often necessarily. I think it elevates it. I definitely like those, the ballads. Much like the album, the cover design is also conceptually there, but not quite executed perfection. This is ultimately a Conan the Barbarian kind of style, inspired tale. So, visually it kind of depicts that. And I think that the drawings are cheeky and interesting and they're fun, but ultimately, it's the composition, right? They didn't really think about how all the elements of all the drawings kind of came together, and they just kind of slapped it on there, and it's just, it's, also, they needed to decide whether or not, the background or the foreground, like what element was going to anchor the design. And unfortunately, they're caught in between, and everything just kind of blends together. Do I recommend the album? Just with the music, this is their debut. And I want to, as a result, I want to cut them some slack, especially with the respect of the creativity and ambition that they have. So I'd say yes, but come with an open mind because, you got to know that the production is not very good, but also this is a very long album, so be prepared for that. Personally, I don't mind it because I think that they keep you entertained mostly throughout. Plus, again, it has a story, as a theme with it, so it kind of, it's almost basically a concept album, right? So, actually, one other thing I was going to make note of is that their name throws me off a little bit. In fact, I almost kind of think that it should be reversed. I actually prefer the Savage Sword as the band name and then the Nemedian Chronicles as the album. Like, whether it's a series or the album name, I don't know. I don't know if I'll have Nemedian Chronicles as the band name. Just saying. But anyways, give it a listen. Let me know what you think. GrafikMetal rating, I'm going to give it an 82. All right, last thing I want to highlight is it's just a song. It's "The Bringer of Light" by Ebon Heart. It's a power metal song, and not even a particularly great song. But at the 1 minute and 20-second mark, pay close attention to the transition breakdown. It's really impressive and an excellent an idea to combine both the old and new schools of music, metal together. All right, that was the list. And as always, an update. I keep saying this, but I really am close to finishing up my designs, getting the website back up and running, and getting the rest of the social media channels set up. And I got a lot more content on the way very soon. Until the next time, keep on rocking, and remember to support the rock and metal community. We all need each other. Cheers.